What's up, party people? How's it going, Bitcoiners? What's going on, fam? Yo, what's up? Hey, everybody. I want to talk to you briefly today about the state of decentralized naming. For those of you that are new, we talk about decentralized naming on blockchains. We're typically referring to a way to have a human readable name pointing at an object in a way where no central authority can have control over what data that name points to. So the canonical example of a naming system is the domain name system. The DNS system, that's the names, the .coms that you type into your web browser to access websites and web apps, your favorite games, your favorite websites, stuff like that. So if you go back to the Bitcoin white paper, Satoshi talked about a replacement for the domain name system as being one of the applications he thought uh, the blockchain technology behind Bitcoin would be applicable to. Inspired by his thoughts on this, the Namecoin project, which was the first altcoin, a fork of Bitcoin with some additional functionality added, was created, and it made the first decentralized name system. So back in, I would say, probably 2013, when I first got interested in this space, I took a look at other applications of the technology behind Bitcoin, and Namecoin was one thing that I found. State of the project at the time was sort of your typical open source project. There were a few contributors. It was nothing remotely productizable. Didn't look like something that any serious entrepreneur would consider building on. Wasn't something that any user that sort of had even the slightest desire to have good user experience would want to use. Um, so I moved on, and so in 2014, early 2014, um, when Ryan and Manib from what used to be called Onename launched the Onename project, I was very interested. I saw a very polished for a startup application built. At the time, it was built on top of Namecoin, and it allows you to register names and use them as your identity. And the pitch for this service was that you'd register an identity and you could link a Bitcoin address to that identity, and use your Onename, your username, if you will, as an easy way for people to send you Bitcoin. They didn't need to know your long, complicated address. They could just type in the name, and you could even go as far as to verify other pieces of information, ownership of your Twitter account, Facebook account, etc., so that someone could be sure that if they were sending money to Larry.id's Bitcoin address, that Larry.id was in fact the person that they thought it was going to be. So this is very exciting. I mean, it was clearly a product that someone um, who has sort of a good sense of product taste or likes well written software would want to use, and it really sort of catalyzed my interest in the space, and it was really how I sort of felt started falling on the rabbit hole. So in the process of running Onename, we found that Namecoin had a bunch of problems. It was really not a successful blockchain for building something um, that you wanted to store any value on. At a certain point, we found that it was only being mined by one party. There were security bugs that weren't getting fixed. There wasn't really a strong ecosystem around it. So we realized that we needed to build any name system that was going to be built would be best to be built on the most secure blockchain. And back at the time, Bitcoin was the most secure blockchain, and it is still the most secure blockchain today. It has the most value on it, and it has sort of the longest track record of running securely. So with BNS 1.0, blockchain main system, we moved the names that were on um, Namecoin with one name and migrated the system and the ecosystem to be on top of Bitcoin. And going forward, we ran into some of the same scalability problems everybody else ran into in 2017. We found out that transactions can very quickly become very expensive, so it's best to be efficient with the number of transactions you use. We were doing, I think at the beginning, 4 Bitcoin transactions to register every name. So when fees per transaction went up to around $20 a transaction, you'd have situations where people were paying close to 80 US dollars worth of Bitcoin fees just to register a single name. It was sort of at that time we realized that scaling uh, things like this need to be done on separate layers. So yeah, we realized that paying $80 a name wasn't really scalable. Wouldn't result in a name system that people would actually use, and we started working on making a more generalized system with Stacks 2.0, on top of which BNS 2.0 could be launched, which happened earlier this year. Around the BNS 1.0 days, we also realized that not only could names be used for identity, but those identities could also be used as identities in applications. You could be used you could use these identities to sign into applications to cryptographically verify that you were who you claimed you were, and to store the data from your applications in a way such that only you with access to your private key could access that data, and that you could share that data with other users on the system securely by just knowing their name. So you could say, I'm going to share some files with Manib.id. You could do a lookup on Manib.id, and you could find out his public key, and you could encrypt the files that you wanted to share using his public key. So that was the BNS 1.0 days. And its functionality still is used today in a number of apps in BNS 2.0. During that time, at the same time, a few other name projects appeared on sort of the blockchain horizon, if you will. One of those I think was particularly interesting is Handshake, HNS. HNS took a different approach to the one that we took. Our approach was to have a new name system with a new set of top level domains in that name system to really start from scratch. Um, HNS, on the other hand, said, hey, everybody's using DNS. Let's see if we can sort of try to work with DNS and try to co opt DNS and add a layer of um, sort of cryptographic security on top of that. But it's not even cryptographic security because we already have that with DNSSEC. But add bring decentralization to the existing system. And their strategy for doing that was to create another proof of work coin, and to create a token and distribute that token to all of the relevant stakeholders in the system. So they distributed tokens to ICANN and other naming projects and various players and companies in the system, with the hope that this would all give them an incentive to work for the success of the system. Very interesting approach. So one other unique thing that they did was that they said, hey, we're going to try to sell the top level domains, top level domain being something like a .com or a .net. We're going to sell the top level domains in DNS that ICANN hasn't sold yet, um, which is potentially millions of them. And their idea was that ICANN had publicly announced that they weren't planning to sell any additional TLDs for a number of years. And the Handshake idea was, hey, we're going to try to sell those before ICANN starts selling them again, and then hopefully we'll get enough traction by that time, and they'll be convinced that they should recognize that top-level domains that we've sold is actually part of the ICANN domain name system. Um, Interesting approach, risky but interesting. So HNS has gotten a lot of interest from the sort of your classic domainer community, the people that would make money by buying up domain names and hoping to sell them for a profit. They see top level domains that are being sold by HNS as pieces of property that they can try to sell names in. So what this means is that like somebody in HNS will buy a top level domain, they'll set up essentially a centralized registrar, like much like VeriSign runs for .com, and they'll sell names in those and they'll collect the fees. So another project was the ENS Ethereum name system, which appeared around the same time as BNS 1.0 and HNS. And ENS is just a smart contract on top of Ethereum, um, and it's mostly focused on .eth. In fact, they've said that they want to work with ICANN, um, work for with them to get .eth accepted as an ICANN domain. They don't see them as a competitor. And finally, at least from my point of view, the other name system that's interesting is Unstoppable Domains, which is, I'm not sure if that's actually the name of the name system, but it's the name system that's built on top of Basilica. And they have, similarly to Ethereum, decided, hey, we're going to try to work with ICANN, and they've created a small number of top level domains um, on their platform. .zil, .crypto, I think, is the more famous one. And the idea is that they're trying to work to get people to accept those TLDs through various methods, and then at some point, ICANN will accept those as sort of de facto members of the ICANN domain name system. So that's really where we are today. It's really hard to say how many of these name systems have really gotten a lot of traction or even really found product market fit. It still seems like the use case that gets people most excited is the ability to send crypto to someone else using their name instead of an address. And I just, over the past few weeks, I've been seeing people on Twitter from various name systems saying, hey, how come so and such exchange isn't adding support for my name so that I can withdraw money directly to myself or to my friend using my name? And so, yeah, there's talk of that. It's never really gotten that much traction. We've seen this over and over and over. People trying to make username systems to send crypto to them, but I think that there's a couple problems why that hasn't really taken off. The main reason is that people don't really send Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to their friends that regularly. It's sort of like, why would you, if it's valuable, why do you want to keep sending it to your friends? You want to keep it for yourself. You don't really pay for meals or trips with cryptocurrency yet. People are still using things like Venmo, the US, and FPS in Hong Kong. If you think the fiat currency isn't going to go up, then wouldn't you want to spend that first? Why would you want to spend your tokens that you think are going to go to the moon, right? So yeah, it's really, it's not really a use case that's gotten huge amount of support. We still see names being used as identity for apps in the Stacks ecosystem. Again, it's not a huge, it's not like a thing that app developers are clamoring for, and that users are saying, hey, I'm only going to sign up for that app if it supports a Stacks name. I think we still haven't gotten to the point where people can really see the power of being able to use a decentralized name across separate apps. So where do we go for the future with names? I think there's still a lot of areas that haven't been explored with decentralized naming, and like Satoshi, I think that this is really still um, one of the best use cases for cryptocurrency and for blockchains. Names are just very important for letting us find things. The first place people go to censor is often the domain name system. If I can get rid of Larry's domain name, I've suddenly made it very hard for other people to find the information Larry has put in that domain name. Um, so that's really the place I think that decentralization is very valuable. The question is, how do you get people to use it? And I think one of the things that we're missing are easy ways to publish to those names. Another thing we're missing is a way to easily communicate to other people that, hey, this name is not something that you type into Chrome and expect to work. This name is something that belongs in another browser, another app. One of the things that we should look at is, how do you make these names unique? How do you make it easier for people to publish these names? And I think that also a couple interesting things that I'm thinking a lot about now are this idea of letting people make different rules for different namespaces. So having smart contracts that could govern namespaces. You can imagine if you have a world where namespaces and sub namespaces can be governed by smart contracts, you can add all sorts of interesting rules to them that would make each namespace unique. Namespaces that are governed by smart contracts would let people make business models for those namespaces, and they would sort of give you the benefits of the HNS model, where someone buys a top level domain and then runs a register on it, but without the centralization risks that you have. So in HNS, when you buy a TLD, someone and you buy a name from someone with that TLD, you really just added a new point of failure. So instead of trusting ICANN and then this huge company VeriSign that's been running .com for many years, you're instead uh, trusting this coin that doesn't really have a lot of hash power behind it, and you're trusting the sort of random one man shop domainer that decided to buy whatever TLD that you bought a name from, and you're trusting his ability to run servers and data centers and not lose your data and resolve it and make sure there's a high uptime, all those sorts of things. So that's not really an ideal thing. What you'd really want to do is you want to give people the ability to have an ownership stake in namespaces and collect benefits from the investment they make in developing an ecosystem around namespace. And the way you can do that is with smart contracts. So not only can you collect fees from registering it there, you can set certain rules. So for example, you could imagine namespaces where anybody with a verified ID in a particular country could register. You could imagine a situation where namespaces allow you to only register a name if you've published a certain type of file at that name, and there's a number of oracles that verify that. So you're trading off some level of decentralization at the registration stage, but you still get the ownership of the name. Once the name is registered according to the rules, you get to keep it. No one can take it away from you. Anybody can resolve it. And you're not dependent on the owner of the namespace to actually use the name. I think that's really interesting, and that's something that we should explore. Another thing that's really interesting are the DAOs. I hesitate to use the word DAO because I don't really like that term, but I think that if there's anything we've learned from the development of other coins besides Bitcoin, it is that incentives matter. Incentives matter. Incentives matter. Incentives matter. Incentives matter. One of the reasons that there hasn't been a huge amount of adoption in decentralized name projects are not because the technology doesn't work and it's not needed in certain areas. The reason is that there hasn't been a huge incentive to do so. It's hard to capture the value of using this name system. Um, and the investment that you have to overcome, the trade-off between user experience versus the status quo is such that there needs to be upside for a business to take the risk of building on a, at the moment, not very widely used name system. And the way to do that is what Satoshi discovered, is to have people that buy into your project through your tokens have upside in it. There are a number of ways to do that, and that's something that needs more explanation. It's exciting to see ENS with their token offering with the ENS DAO, which will be used to fund development and hopefully make their naming ecosystem more vibrant. And I think there's some things that we can look at in the Stacks ecosystem as well too, to bring that vibrant naming system to Bitcoin. So yeah, thanks for taking time to listen here. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on naming. Are you still interested in it? Do you not like it? Do you think it's not going to work? Are there any applications that you'd like to see? What's the thing that's going to make this really take off? I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to send me a message on Twitter or drop me an email at larry@newinternetlabs.com. Love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Talk soon. Bye bye.